Thank you. Any other discussion? Mr. Blouse?
Thank you, Madam President. I had a question for Mr. Baturlo, if I might call him back to the podium. We talked at the meeting a couple weeks ago. We talked about amending it to October 31st, and then you all said at the time it was okay, pending further research, and you did some further research, and now you're moving away from it. And you said earlier today that at informal that this would not be something that you would support at any point during the coming fiscal year. And you used Portland as an example in your memo that we received. I'm wondering, were there cities that you looked at that were successful, or did you just find Portland had trouble? And then, I mean, I know that there are cities all over the country that are using technology and using the technology community outside of the government to help with this. And we heard Mr. Todd say at the budget meeting today that he'd be welcome to have some type of summit or meeting with programmers that we could figure out a way to get this done, whether the deadline was October 31st, but now we're saying that the deadline is at a minimum July 1st of 2017 before we can do this. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is accurate. And we looked at Portland because that is something that Mr. Agilesto, in our meetings and our conversations, that was a community that he had mentioned. We looked at other entities too. Now, Portland was unsuccessful to their estimation, unsuccessful in their attempt to do this, and they've had to put, their words, considerable resources into it to make it something that is successful. The company that I spoke of is successful, but then again, they have a staff of 11 people, content writers that are feeding the beast, so to speak. So that's the issue, is the resources required to go into this. It's not something that we, the administration, want to do halfway. If we're going to do it, let's do it right. Let's do it in a way that we don't have to keep coming back to you all, or I don't have to sit there and say, I'm sorry it wasn't successful, let's try something different. We are transparent in what we do. Every single thing that we do, we come before this body with a paper and show you exactly what we're doing, what the project is, the scope of the project, the duration of the project, and the funding source associated with it. So we are.
And I get that, and I think everybody else does, but if that's the case, would the administration have a problem with perhaps having, I mean, there's an army of people that know a lot more about computers than any of us that are in Richmond that want to do civic good. All of these documents, like you said, are public. They come before this body, so there really shouldn't be an issue with putting them on a public server or a cloud server that we don't have to maintain, that people can access. Mr. Todd mentioned that some companies have problems with stuff going on cloud servers like that, but if they're bidding on a project that's worth more than $5 million, they better not have a problem with putting their information online, because it is a public project and they need to be vetted. So, I mean, is the administration amenable at some point, whether this goes up or down or gets continued or whatever, to doing something like that? Because you all don't have the resources, we don't have the money, but there are people that want to help. Are we going to extend them an olive branch, or are we just going to say we're not going to get back to this till July of next year?
I think it gets back to the crux of the issue. I mean, so what everybody has told us is they have considerable resources devoted to doing something like this, in the way of staff, content writers, and people that really do make it something that's worthwhile, those that are successful. The IT portion of it, that portion of the solution, is something that certainly we're amenable to exploring any of that. But that is not even something, you heard Mr. Todd talk about his budget, so we would have to go forward with meetings and look at this and try to figure out what's the best way to move forward with it. As written, this is not something that we can do in the short term.
I understand that. Let me go another direction, or veer slightly. Is the administration willing, for instance, I mean, a week ago, the city put up the East Main Street Relocated Dock Street project. It's got a map. I mean, it's not what Mr. Agilasto is talking about, but it's a start. It's got a scope. It's got a comment card. Fortunately, it's not electronic. You have to print it out and send it in. It's got a map. It's got a schedule. It's got cost. And that's a start. So let me, and Parker can weigh in on this. because this is a big passion of mine. I mentioned a couple weeks ago the site that I built with some friends. I didn't build it, they did, but it was just kind of a group think thing where we built vacantrichmond.com. And the only thing we got from the city to build that website was an Excel spreadsheet with information about where the vacant houses were, how long they had been vacant, the address, and geolocated when that was kind of new. Is there a project that we can do perhaps on a trial basis using one project, for instance, and let's see what the civic-minded technology community in Richmond can do with it as a stepping stone? That would be a heck of a lot faster than all of us trying to figure out what to do. And just pick one or two things and get together with some people and say, here it is, come back to us with something that'll help us manage government and be transparent.
We are happy to work with whomever you would like, and you included, on trying to develop something, but let's do it outside the time frame or the ordinance as written. Let's do it, let's bring something together back that where we think we have something successful, and then if you all want to introduce an ordinance that this is something we can implement, and if we all are amenable to it, then we have a collaborative effort that we can all be proud of.
Great. So if we, and I'm not speaking for Mr. Agelasto, if he can hear me in Florida, I'm just going to say, if we continued something like this for, say, a couple of months, maybe even the summer, while we built Vacant Richmond in 4 days. And so I know that we can find a project and build something around it pretty cool within a relatively short amount of time. But I'm just curious, Mr. Agelasto, if you can hear me, if that is an option or however you want to proceed. But I think that might be something that would get people engaged. Mr. Todd, like he wants to say something.
I would be amenable to the proposal that Mr. Beliles has put forth. And I think one thing that I would also encourage is that there are significant projects already underway that have some component of this type of transparency included in them. And I think about the Richmond Speaks and the Lumpkins Jail and the fact that there's already a website built for this. And how do we include more of that? I believe that as we talk more about the boulevard, as we talk more about the riverfront plan, etc., there's already much of this plan already being implemented. The question just becomes, can we template? Can we make it a consistent format? And can we set a program that has a level of expectations from the public? The other issue that I think is very important here is when and how are public taxpayer dollars being spent on these projects for transparency, and the information that the administration provided where $24,000 was spent on websites for the school construction. And I asked the question of if that's in an AECOM contract for them to provide that service as a for-profit company, are those resources not better deployed internally to augment the IT budget and to develop a system where the public works or the schools or parks, whomever is responsible for the capital project, could in fact create some consistent template?
Madam President, Charles Todd, Interim Director, DIT. I think we have somehow in this conversation, certainly what I read as a recap last week, there have been some misunderstandings that we're addressing this as a technology problem. And so first let me say it's not a technology issue, that the template, the things I have discussed with Councilman Agelasto are doable in terms of technology. The challenge that these agencies face is in the variance and the difference of ways that they have kept information today. So the assistance they need isn't necessarily true technology or development assistance. They need clerical assistance. They need writing assistance. For example, if you're a project manager and you've kept all of your project files on your hard drive, then when this template goes live, they're going to have to move those files from their computer into the location so they're accessible. If they happen to be in a file format that the public might not have, let's say a Visio document, then a clerk, a project manager, somebody needs to convert that to a PDF format. Easy, technologically speaking, but it's the amount of time it would take somebody to do that. So, or again, if you have documents, for example, maps that might come in, or plans in the planning department, if they're on 24 or 36-inch paper on a roll, I'm not sure how they would accomplish scanning that into an electronic format. So for me, from a technology perspective, where they look at me with blank stares is when I say, now your staff is going to have the hours of rounding the stuff up and typing what might be necessary to make this usable by the public. I think that's where staff has the pain point. So I think the trick is to sit down, as you suggested, with some items and look at what would it take for a typical project to gather up the information and post it. How much time will that take of their staff in order to do it? So again, I don't see it as being a matter of development technology as much as it is an end user, clerical type function, human hours to mass assemble and publish the first time and keep it up. I hope that helps. I believe I may not have given you that proper perspective last time, but that's where the issues are, is in that human staffing.
Madam President. It does. Thank you, Mr. Todd. And all I'm talking about is, starting small and crawling before we start walking and running. And if you all are amenable to getting the group together and looking at maybe the thing doesn't work, but I'm willing to bet that we can make something happen with a group of technological minds mixed with. I hope.
Hello, Mr. Argelesto.
Sorry, thank you. I got disconnected.
No problem. Madam CAO, you have something?
Yes, Madam President, members of City Council. Is there a recommendation as it relates to a time frame that might be accommodating for both?
Well,
if
Mr. Argelesto did say that he'd be amenable to continue. I was thinking, sometime later this summer after we get through the budget to sit down maybe in the next month or two with some people and like I said, we don't know what we can do until we look at what we have, and we don't have to start with the big projects that require massive scanning and things like that, but
would the timeline be for us to do the exploration before a deadline is going to?
Absolutely. You'd come back this summer and say, okay, we'll continue this ordinance that currently has the October 31st deadline, and then we'll come back knowing more in a couple of months and say, okay, we'll amend it and say January 1 or
Sure.
Or we'll kill it.
What would be adopted tonight then?
Pardon?
What would be adopted tonight?
Nothing. I'm suggesting to Mr. Argelesto to continue this paper and for us to meet with some, like I said, some civic-minded tech people.
Sure.
And then figure out where we are and then come back and revisit this paper.
I would support us sitting down together and perhaps putting together a timeline whereby we can look at a doable explanation for the entire council as it relates to a recommendation. So if we're going to continue and have time to sit, I certainly would like to be part of that conversation with staff and whomever from the community that wants to be a part of something that moves us forward rather than having us being stagnant with progress. I think I hear what your questions are as it relates to information being provided to the public. We just are concerned about the flexibility in delivering on what your legislation would authorize that we are to do. So I think that's number one, the concern, that if you were to adopt it tonight, you would legislate and bind us to a timeline that may not be palatable. So certainly we are willing to sit down and come up with a plan of action, sort of exploring some of the things that you've laid out tonight, and then perhaps we can make that decision or come to a conclusion on what is actually doable for the staff for implementation.
Yes, ma'am. I think it'd be better for all of us and the city to, rather rather than through legislation, that we figure out a way to work with other people to get it done, and then we see a path forward to say, okay, we can work with the outside community to develop something, and then in the long term, we get to that complex project stuff.
Sure. We just don't want to be put in a precarious position. I know the criticism has been that we've not delivered on what you've authorized us to do. We just want to make certain that we're partners in looking at something that's a bit palatable as it relates to the product that you want at the end of the day.
I did send Mr. Agelasto an email, Madam President, and he said he'd be amenable to continue this till, say, is it the June 27th meeting, Madam Clerk? Yes, the June 27th.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to make a motion to continue this till then.
Second.
Madam President.
I think Dr. Newbell had her hand first. If you can give me, Dr. Newbell.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to offer that in those discussions that we, not dissimilar from Mr. Samuel's paper earlier, that we look at academic partners who have capstone projects and other kinds of projects that they can devote fairly intensive staff time to, whether it's VCU, U of R. I mean, we have choices, VUU, that could work with us, and maybe even, have this being ongoing type of project for their students. So if we just include.
Certainly.
Ms. Graziano?
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to make sure that that June 27th date for the paper to come back is amenable, because I think everybody wants to work together, but we are in the middle of budget, which I think is sort of going to consume everybody till that gets passed. So is there enough time to put this group together and discuss, so to speak, by June 27th? It's just my question.
There is a lot on the agenda, I have to admit, and I understand that the budget cycle probably won't end until May. Is that correct? It's going to be tight for us with everything else that you have certainly put on the plate, on the table for consideration. Not necessarily this item, but a number of other items. So certainly a little bit more time, but I am committed to sitting down and being part of the team to ensure that we bring back something that's palatable for the city and will certainly meet the intent of the legislation that you have for your consideration.
Madam President.
Ms. Trumbull.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Madam President, thank you. We're talking about after June, so that'd be after the budget, because we have to adopt a budget by May. And I asked, I can't find my notes. Earlier I had asked, how much is this going to cost, and the vacancies and all of that. And I know the citizens that are watching the council meeting now, they did not hear the discussion from 12 o'clock until 4 o'clock, where we had, and I'll just say just one, the police chief coming down here talking about the vacancies, Public Works talking about vacancies and all of that. Where are we going to get the money? And also, how much money is this? And I don't want to take from something else that's going to hurt us and throw it for this in June, when we got to realize that this is going to be a nasty, nasty budget this year. So how much, I'm sorry, John, or Selena, can you tell me how much, because I know you gave it to me earlier today.
I think there were some numbers thrown up, but I think the recommendation is for us to sit down and probably have a menu of these particular concerns, and that we will sit down and come up with something that could draw a conclusion that will say, perhaps, it does not work for the city of Richmond based upon the concept that is part of what's on your agenda tonight. So I know John has shared with you what has happened in Portland based upon the recommendation coming from the council member as a project that's currently being done, that you're looking at an extreme number of resources being dedicated. But I think what I'm hearing from Councilman Biles and others is that if we can sit down and come up with a game plan to better understand that, because I do understand your need to make certain that the public has the ability to consume information and know what's going on as it relates to a series of projects. So we need to sit down and perhaps better understand Richmond costs. I know Charles Todd did share with you a conceptual scenario of costs, but that's only one element as it relates to the request. So certainly June may be a bit tight, but I'm willing for us to sit down and perhaps have a more palatable timeline, maybe June, maybe beyond June. But I think we need to come to some conclusion about us sitting together and bringing in some professional practitioners. I think what we're hearing from you, Dr. Newbill, who really understand what we want to accomplish, and we can come up with something that we can recommend to the council that perhaps can work for our city. And it may not look like what Portland has or some of the other communities. It may be something a bit differently, but I think having some of the expertise from our own staff as well as some external to be part of the discussion, and then we can make some recommendation to the full body on what should be the course of action. June may be a little tight for us, Mr. Bilal, so maybe if you could give us a bit more time. But I'm willing to commit to sitting down with the elected body to come up with something that may be a bit more flexible for the city.
Thank you, Mr. Bilal.
Thank you. I understand, and the reason I just chose June is because if we need to come back and have this discussion and amend something, it would be amended in July, and then we don't meet again until September. Rather, if we did it in July, then we wouldn't amend it till September. And I'm pretty confident that we can find one or two small projects that the civic community here can get their teeth around, and then we just continue it anyway I think they can get something done before then, but you know,
it may be a pilot more so than the actual product. I think that's what I'm hearing.
And to Ms. Trammell's point about the money, what I envision here is perhaps us getting a couple of small projects throughout the rest of the year done, working with City Hall, working with the civic community programmers, and then for next year's budget, we have some type of rhythm or process in place where then this could get more accurately budgeted for the cost and the time, and hopefully better.
Sure. I think what we're hearing from John and from Charles is the timing for the work that's going to be required of the city employees. And with everything else that they have on their plate, are we able to deliver on what you want? And I think having the time to really understand that is something that you all want to hear, so that if it's going to be legislated, that we can actually deliver the product that you want.
Okay. All right, Ms. Graziano?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to get my arms around what we're talking about here. So, Mr. Blas, you want to continue this paper till June 27?
Preferably.
Preferably. And at that time, maybe we'll hear about a pilot project, and then that paper
Would be continued.
Until
Whenever, depending on what we
We do the analysis and probably, hopefully have some of the elements laid out with the pros and the cons. I think that's what you would probably want to hear, so that you can make a more prudent decision on the course of action for the staff, as well as what your expectations might be for the community.
Madam President, just real quick, my expectation only of that June date is that we come back here and have an update for the public to say, this is what we've done, these are the people we work with, this is the type of pilot project that we're going to implement or is already up and running, and then go from there. I don't anticipate us coming back in June and saying, okay, now we're going to set a date to implement this in legislate. Like I said, I prefer this not even be legislated.
Right.
And I appreciate your willingness to work.
I understand.
Thank you.
The motion.
So I did make the motion to continue till June 27th, yes ma'am.
We have a motion by Councilman Bilal to continue item number 34, ordinance 2015-192 to June 27th, and it has been seconded by Vice President Hilbert. Mr. Bilal?
Aye.
Ms. Graziano?
Aye.
Mr. Samuels?
Aye.
Mr. Agilesto?
Aye.
Ms. Robertson?
Aye.
Ms. Trammell?
Aye.
Ms. Newbill? Aye. Vice President Hilbert?
Aye.
President Mosby?
Aye.
That motion has passed. That paper will be before you on June the 27th.